She kissed a man at a party, and the next morning found out he was her new millionaire client. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew she shouldn't have gone to that party, but she did. The golden hour light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Jasmine Cole's corner office, casting warm shadows across her cluttered desk. Marketing campaigns, client presentations, and half-empty coffee cups painted the picture of a woman who lived for her work and sometimes forgot to live for herself. At 29, Jasmine had built a reputation in Los Angeles that most consultants could only dream of. She possessed that rare gift of seeing potential where others saw problems, transforming forgotten brands into household names with an intuition that bordered on magic. Her rich mahogany skin glowed under the afternoon sun, and her natural curls were pulled back into a sleek bun that somehow managed to look both professional and effortlessly beautiful. But today, something felt different. "Jazz, you're doing it again," came a familiar voice from the doorway. Jasmine looked up to find her best friend and colleague, Maya, leaning against the frame with an expression that mixed concern with mild exasperation. Maya's arms were crossed, her perfectly manicured eyebrow raised in that way that meant business. "Doing what?" Jasmine asked, though she already knew the answer. "That thing where you disappear into your work and forget the rest of the world exists." Maya stepped into the office, her heels clicking against the polished concrete floor. "When's the last time you went somewhere that wasn't a client meeting or a coffee run?" Jasmine opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. The truth was, she couldn't remember. Months had blurred together in a haze of deadlines and presentations, each success building on the last until she'd created a fortress of professional achievement around herself. "That's what I thought," Maya said, settling into the chair across from Jasmine's desk. "Which is why you're coming with me tonight." "Maya, I have the Henderson proposal to finish." "The Henderson proposal can wait. Tonight there's a party at the Beverly Hills Hotel. Elegant, sophisticated, and exactly what you need to remember that life exists outside these walls." Jasmine leaned back in her leather chair, studying her friend's determined expression. Maya had that look, the one that meant she wouldn't take no for an answer. "I don't even have anything to wear to something like that," Jasmine protested weakly. Maya's smile turned victorious. "Already handled. There's a dress hanging in your car. Black, gorgeous and perfect for someone who's forgotten how stunning she is when she's not buried in spreadsheets." Despite herself, Jasmine felt a flutter of excitement in her chest. It had been so long since she'd done something spontaneous, something just for the joy of it. The rational part of her mind catalogued all the reasons she should stay home. Work to finish, emails to answer, the comfortable predictability of her routine. But another part, a part she'd been ignoring for months, whispered that maybe Maya was right. "Fine," she said, surprising herself with the decision, "but just for a couple of hours." Maya's face lit up. "That's my girl. Pick me up at 8. As her friend left, Jasmine found herself staring out the window at the bustling streets below. Los Angeles stretched out before her, a city of dreams and second chances, of moments that could change everything if you were brave enough to let them. She didn't know it yet, but tonight would be one of those moments. 3 hours later, the Beverly Hills Hotel lobby buzzed with the kind of energy that only came when beautiful people gathered in beautiful places. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors, and the soft murmur of conversations mixed with the gentle notes of a jazz quartet in the corner. Jasmine adjusted the neckline of her dress. Maya had been right. It was perfect, and tried to remember the last time she'd felt this nervous about a social event. The black fabric hugged her curves in all the right places, and she'd let her curls down, framing her face in a way that made her dark brown eyes seem even more luminous. "You look like you're about to bolt," Maya observed, appearing at her elbow with 2 champagne flutes. "I feel like I'm about to bolt," Jasmine admitted, accepting the glass gratefully. "I'd forgotten how to do this." "Do what? Have fun?" Maya's laugh was warm and encouraging. "It's like riding a bike, Jazz, you'll remember." The champagne was crisp and bright, sending tiny bubbles dancing across Jasmine's tongue. She let her eyes wander across the room, taking in the mix of familiar faces and intriguing strangers. Everyone seemed so confident, so effortlessly social. "Come on," Maya said, linking their arms. "Let's mingle." They moved through the crowd, Maya introducing Jasmine to various acquaintances while she nodded and smiled, falling back into the rhythm of small talk and social pleasantry. It was like muscle memory, she realized. These skills she'd developed in college and early in her career, before work had consumed everything. She was laughing at something Maya had said when it happened. A sensation, like being watched, like being seen. Jasmine turned, scanning the room for the source of the feeling, and that's when her eyes met his. He was tall, easily 6'2", with dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it and shoulders that filled out his perfectly tailored navy suit. But it was his eyes that caught her, blue-green, like the ocean on a clear day, and looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Their gazes held for a moment that stretched like eternity, the noise of the party fading into background whisper. He smiled, not the practiced smile of networking events, but something genuine and surprised, as if he hadn't expected to find her there either. "Jazz." Maya's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You okay?" Jasmine blinked, breaking the connection, and turned back to her friend. "Yeah, I think I need some air." She excused herself and made her way toward the hotel's garden terrace, her heart beating faster than the champagne warranted. The cool night air was a relief against her heated skin, and she took a deep breath, trying to center herself. "Beautiful night." The voice came from behind her, and she didn't need to turn around to know who it belonged to. That same awareness that had drawn her attention in the crowded room now made her skin tingle with anticipation. "It is," she agreed, finally turning to face him. Up close, he was even more striking. There was something about his presence that suggested confidence without arrogance, success without smugness. When he smiled, tiny lines appeared at the corners of his eyes, suggesting someone who laughed often. "I'm Brad," he said, extending his hand. "Jasmine." His hand was warm and strong, and she found herself reluctant to let go. "So, Jasmine," he said, and she liked the way her name sounded in his voice. "What brings you to a party where you look like you'd rather be anywhere else?" She laughed, surprised by his directness. "That obvious? To someone who feels the same way?" "Yeah." They talked easily after that, about everything and nothing. He told her about his work in tech investment, how he'd built his company from a one-room office to something that now occupied 3 floors in downtown LA. She shared stories about her most challenging clients, the brands she'd brought back from the brink of irrelevance. But it wasn't really about the words. It was about the way he listened, truly listened, and the way her usual guardedness seemed to melt away in his presence. It was about how the space between them seemed to shrink, without either of them moving, drawn by a gravity neither fully understood. When he brushed a curl away from her face, his touch was gentle, questioning. When she didn't pull away, his eyes darkened with something that made her pulse quicken. "I should probably get back inside," she whispered, though she made no move to leave. "Probably," he agreed, his voice rougher now. The kiss happened like a match striking, sudden, bright, impossible to ignore. His lips were warm and sure against hers, and she found herself melting into him, her hands fisting in the fabric of his shirt. It was the kind of kiss that made you forget where you were, who you were supposed to be. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jasmine's world had shifted on its axis. She started, then stopped, not knowing how to finish. Brad's thumb traced her cheek gently. "I know." They stood there for a moment, the weight of what had just happened settling between them. Then, as if a spell had broken, Jasmine stepped back. "I should go," she said, her voice shaky. "Jasmine, wait." But she was already walking away, her heart pounding and her mind reeling. She found Maya near the bar and made excuses about an early morning meeting, ignoring her friend's knowing look. All the way home, she could still taste him on her lips. All the way home, she told herself it was just a moment of madness. She had no idea that in 12 hours, everything would change again. Some mistakes you can forget. Others find you when you least expect them. Jasmine's alarm clock screamed at 6:30 a.m., jolting her from a restless sleep filled with blue-green eyes and the phantom taste of champagne kisses. She groaned, rolling over to silence the offending sound, and immediately regretted the movement as her head throbbed in protest. It wasn't the champagne, she'd only had 2 glasses, it was the memory. Sitting on the edge of her bed, she buried her face in her hands, trying to piece together the events of the previous night with the harsh clarity of morning light. The party, the terrace, the way he'd looked at her like she was the only person in the room, the kiss. "Oh God," she whispered to her empty bedroom. "What did I do?" Her reflection in the bathroom mirror told the story her mind was trying to forget. Her usually pristine appearance was disheveled, mascara smudged beneath her eyes, and her lips still looked slightly swollen. She looked like a woman who'd done something reckless, which, apparently, she had. The hot shower helped wash away the physical evidence, but as she stood under the scalding spray, the memory played on repeat. The way Brad had said her name, the gentleness in his touch, the absolute certainty in that moment that kissing him was the most natural thing in the world. It was just a kiss, she told herself firmly, wrapping a towel around her body. A moment of temporary insanity brought on by too much champagne and not enough sleep. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. There had been something else in that kiss, something that made her stomach flutter even now in the harsh light of her marble bathroom. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. So, who was the mystery man on the terrace? Jasmine stared at the message, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. How could she explain something she didn't understand herself? How could she tell Maya that she'd kissed a complete stranger and felt more alive in those 10 seconds than she had in months? Just someone I met. Nothing important, she typed back, then immediately deleted it. Too much champagne. Don't remember much, she tried instead, but that felt even worse. Finally, she settled on, long story, coffee later. Maya's response was immediate. You bet, and I want details. Jasmine set the phone aside and focused on getting ready for work. Foundation to cover the shadows under her eyes, concealer for the tiny mark on her neck that might or might not have been from Brad's stubble, her most professional blazer, navy blue, structured, armor against whatever residual madness might be lurking in her system. She was 20 minutes late leaving her apartment, which meant she was going to be late for work. Jasmine Cole was never late for work, but as she sat in LA traffic, drumming her fingers against the steering wheel, she couldn't seem to care about her usual punctuality. Her mind kept drifting to the way Brad had smiled, like he was genuinely delighted to meet her. When was the last time someone had looked at her that way? When was the last time she'd felt that spark of connection, that sense of possibility? Stop it, she commanded herself. You don't even know his last name. But her treacherous brain supplied the memory of his voice saying he worked in tech investment, and she found herself wondering if their paths might cross again in LA's interconnected business world. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. The elevator to her office felt slower than usual, giving her too much time to think. She'd managed to compose herself by the time she reached the 20th floor, her professional mask firmly in place. Jasmine Cole, marketing consultant extraordinaire, had returned. The woman who'd kissed a stranger on a hotel terrace was locked away where she belonged. There she is, called Tom Martinez, her business partner, as she walked through the glass doors of Cole and Martinez Marketing Solutions. I was starting to worry you'd been abducted by aliens. Very funny, Jasmine replied, grateful that her voice sounded normal. Traffic was murder. Tom raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. They'd been partners for 4 years, and he knew her well enough to recognize when she was deflecting, but he also knew when to push and when to let things slide. Well, you're just in time for the big announcement, he said, following her toward her office. Richard called an all-hands meeting for 9:30. Jasmine paused, her hand on her office door. Richard Hawthorne was their biggest client, the owner of a boutique marketing firm who'd contracted them for several major accounts. An all-hands meeting usually meant one of two things, very good news or very bad news. Any idea what it's about? She asked. New client, Tom said, his eyes bright with excitement. And from the way Richard was talking, it's big. Like, change the trajectory of our company big. Despite her emotional turbulence, Jasmine felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. This was what she lived for. The challenge of a new brand, the puzzle of finding the perfect message to connect with consumers. It was the one thing that could always center her, no matter what chaos was happening in her personal life. Did he say who the client is? She asked, settling behind her desk and powering up her computer. Some tech investor. Apparently he's launching a new platform and wants to make a serious splash in the market. Tom perched on the edge of her desk, clearly enjoying having information she didn't. Richard seemed pretty impressed with the guy, said he had the kind of vision that could revolutionize how people think about technology. Jasmine nodded absently, scrolling through her emails while Tom talked. Tech investor. In LA, that could be anyone. The city was full of brilliant, ambitious people with the next big idea and the funding to make it happen. Her computer chimed with a calendar reminder. All hands meeting, conference room A, 9:30 a.m. I should prep, she said, reaching for her notebook. Do we have any background materials? Richard said he'd handle the introductions himself. Apparently, our new client specifically requested you to lead the campaign. That made Jasmine look up sharply. Me specifically? How would he even know who I am? Tom shrugged. Word gets around. You've made quite a name for yourself in this city, Jazz. Maybe he saw the Meridian campaign or heard about how you turned around that restaurant chain last year. It was possible, she supposed. Her work did have a certain signature style, and the marketing community in LA was smaller than people thought. Still, something about it felt odd. She made a mental note to ask Richard about it during the meeting. The next hour crawled by as she tried to focus on preparing for the presentation, but her concentration kept fragmenting. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Brad's face. Every time someone walked past her office, she found herself looking up, half expecting, what? That he'd somehow materialize in her workplace. Get it together, she told herself sternly. You're acting like a teenager with a crush. At exactly 9:30, she made her way to conference room A, her tablet loaded with questions and her game face on. Whatever was waiting for her behind that door, she was ready to handle it with the professionalism that had built her reputation. The conference room was already full when she arrived. Richard stood at the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly styled, and his expression animated with the kind of excitement that came with big opportunities. Her colleagues filled the chairs around the polished oak table, all looking eager and attentive. But it was the figure standing with his back to the room, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the LA skyline, that made Jasmine's blood turn to ice. Even from behind she knew those shoulders, knew the way he carried himself, the confident set of his head, knew with a sinking certainty that made her want to turn around and flee, exactly who Richard was about to introduce as their new client. "Ah, Jasmine," Richard said warmly. "Perfect timing. I'd like you to meet Brad Thomas, founder and CEO of Thomas Innovation Group. Brad, this is Jasmine Cole, the marketing genius I was telling you about." The man at the window turned around slowly, and Jasmine's worst fears were confirmed. The same blue-green eyes that had haunted her dreams met hers across the conference room, and for a moment, the carefully controlled expression on his face gave way to something that looked like surprise mixed with amusement. "Ms. Cole," he said, his voice perfectly professional even as his eyes held a warmth that made her pulse quicken. "It's a pleasure to meet you." He extended his hand across the table, and she had no choice but to take it. His touch was just as warm as she remembered, and when his thumb brushed across her knuckles for just a fraction of a second longer than appropriate, she knew he was remembering too. "Mr. Thomas," she managed, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "Welcome to Cole & Martinez." Around the table, her colleagues watched the exchange with interest, but no awareness of the electricity crackling between them. To everyone else, this was just a normal introduction between client and consultant. Only Jasmine could see the slight smile playing at the corners of Brad's mouth, the way his eyes held hers just a beat too long before he turned back to Richard. "As I was saying," Richard continued, apparently oblivious to the undercurrents in the room, "Brad is launching a revolutionary platform that could change how we think about workplace collaboration. The potential market is enormous, and he wants to make sure the messaging is perfect from day one." Brad nodded, his attention now fully focused on the business at hand. "I believe in the power of authentic storytelling to connect with people on an emotional level. From what I've seen of Ms. Cole's work, she has exactly the kind of vision I'm looking for." "Oh God," Jasmine thought. "He researched me. He knows my work." "Jasmine will be your primary point of contact," Richard was saying. "She'll work closely with you to develop a comprehensive campaign strategy that aligns with your vision and budget." "Excellent," Brad said, and when he looked at her again, there was something in his expression that made her stomach flip. "I look forward to working with you, Ms. Cole." The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with Brad outlining his platform and Richard discussing timelines and deliverables. Jasmine took notes automatically, her training taking over even as her mind reeled. She asked intelligent questions and made insightful observations, all while trying to process the surreal situation she found herself in. The man she'd kissed 12 hours ago was now her client. The stranger whose touch had kept her awake all night was going to be working closely with her for the next several months. As the meeting wound down and people began to filter out of the conference room, Brad approached her with a business card in his hand. "My direct number," he said quietly, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "For business purposes, of course." "Of course," she echoed, accepting the card and trying not to think about how his fingers brushed hers. "I should mention," he continued, his blue-green eyes serious now, "I had no idea you worked here when I signed the contract. Richard recommended your firm and I chose you based purely on your professional reputation." Jasmine started, then stopped. What could she say? that she was relieved, disappointed, both. But now that I know, Brad said, stepping closer so that she caught a hint of his cologne, something warm and masculine that made her remember being pressed against him on the terrace. I think this is going to be a very interesting project. He turned and walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing alone in the conference room with her heart pounding and a business card that felt like it was burning a hole in her palm. Jasmine looked down at the elegant black cardstock with its simple, sophisticated design. Brad Thomas, CEO, Thomas Innovation Group. Below that, his direct line and email address. This is fine, she told herself. You're a professional. You can handle working with him. It's just business. But as she walked back to her office on unsteady legs, she couldn't shake the feeling that Brad Thomas was about to turn her carefully ordered world completely upside down. And the worst part? She wasn't entirely sure she minded. The hardest part about pretending something didn't happen is when the other person won't let you forget. For the next 3 days, Jasmine threw herself into research with the kind of intensity usually reserved for Olympic training. She analyzed Brad's company from every conceivable angle: market positioning, competitor analysis, target demographics, brand messaging opportunities. If she was going to work with him, she was going to be the most prepared marketing consultant he'd ever encountered. It was easier to focus on spreadsheets and market data than to think about the way he'd looked at her across that conference table. Easier to lose herself in professional analysis than to remember how her pulse had quickened when he'd stepped close enough for her to catch his scent. She'd almost convinced herself she had everything under control when her phone rang on Thursday morning. "Jasmine Cole," she answered, not looking up from her computer screen where she was reviewing Thomas Innovation Group's quarterly reports. "Ms. Cole, this is Brad Thomas." His voice, even filtered through the phone, sent an unwelcome jolt of awareness through her system. She sat up straighter in her chair, her pen suspended over her notepad. "Mr. Thomas," she replied, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "How can I help you? I was wondering if we could schedule a preliminary meeting to discuss the campaign direction. I know Richard mentioned next week, but I'm eager to get started." Of course you are, she thought, because apparently my life wasn't complicated enough. "Certainly," she said aloud. "I can have my assistant check our calendar and get back to you with some options." "Actually," Brad said, and she could hear something in his voice that made her suspicious. "I was hoping we could meet today. I know it's short notice, but I'm free this afternoon if you are." Jasmine glanced at her calendar. She did have a gap between 2 and 4, but meeting with him alone felt like stepping into a minefield. Then again, putting it off wasn't going to make it any easier. "I suppose I could make some time," she said carefully. "Should we meet here at the office? Would you mind if we met somewhere else? I find I do my best creative thinking outside of traditional office environments. There's a coffee shop in Beverly Hills. Grounds for Coffee on Rodeo Drive. Do you know it?" She did know it. It was one of those artisanal places where serious business was conducted over $12 lattes, and the clientele was a mix of entertainment industry executives and tech entrepreneurs. Neutral territory, but somehow that felt more dangerous than a boardroom. "Fine," she agreed, because refusing would seem unprofessional. 2 o'clock? Perfect. I'll see you there, Ms. Cole. After she hung up, Jasmine stared at her phone for a long moment. She could handle this. She was a professional with years of experience managing difficult clients and complex campaigns. The fact that this particular client had kissed her senseless 3 nights ago was irrelevant. "Keep telling yourself that," her inner voice mocked. Grounds for Coffee was exactly as she remembered: exposed brick walls, industrial lighting, and the kind of carefully curated atmosphere that screamed creative, professional workspace. Jasmine arrived 5 minutes early, partly from habit and partly because she wanted to choose her seat strategically. She selected a table near the window, far enough from other patrons to have a private conversation, but public enough to maintain appropriate boundaries. She was reviewing her notes when she sensed someone approaching. Looking up, she found Brad standing beside her table, and her carefully constructed composure wavered. He looked devastatingly handsome in dark jeans and a charcoal grey sweater that hugged his broad shoulders. His hair was slightly rumpled, as if he'd been running his fingers through it, and when he smiled at her, she felt that familiar flutter in her stomach. "Ms. Cole," he said, settling into the chair across from her, "thank you for making time on such short notice." "Of course," she replied, opening her portfolio with deliberate precision. "I've prepared some initial thoughts based on my research into your company." "Impressive," Brad said, gesturing to her organized materials. "Richard wasn't exaggerating about your thoroughness." Jasmine felt a flush of professional pride, even as she tried to ignore the way his eyes seemed to take in every detail of her appearance. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a burgundy blouse that complemented her skin tone and black slacks that were professional but flattering, armor disguised as business attire. "So," she said, pulling out her tablet, "tell me about your vision for the platform. What problem are you trying to solve?" For the next hour, they talked purely about business. Brad was articulate and passionate about his company's mission, and Jasmine found herself genuinely impressed by his innovative approach to workplace collaboration technology. He wasn't just another tech bro with a buzzword-heavy presentation. He had real insights into human behavior and organizational psychology. She was in the middle of explaining her preliminary campaign strategy when their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their server, a young man with carefully styled hair and the kind of smile that suggested he recognized Brad. "Mr. Thomas," the server said warmly. "Your usual." "Actually, make it 2, Brad replied. "And whatever the lady would like." "Just coffee, Black," Jasmine said quickly, not wanting to extend this meeting any longer than necessary. As the server walked away, she noticed Brad watching her with an amused expression. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing," he said, but his smile suggested otherwise. "It's just, you're very different than you were the other night." Jasmine's carefully maintained professional demeanor cracked slightly. "I don't know what you mean. The other night you were relaxed, spontaneous. You laughed at my terrible jokes and didn't check your phone once." His blue-green eyes held hers steadily. "Right now, you look like you're conducting a military operation." "This is how I conduct business," she said stiffly. "Professional, focused, efficient." "And the other night?" "The other night was—" She paused, searching for the right words. "An anomaly." Brad leaned back in his chair, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to squirm. "An anomaly," he repeated slowly. "Is that what you're calling it?" "Mr. Thomas." "Brad," he corrected softly. "Mr. Thomas," she emphasized, "what happened at the party has nothing to do with our professional relationship. I think it's best if we keep those two things completely separate." "Do you?" he asked, and there was something in his voice that made her pulse quicken. "Because I have to say I keep thinking about that anomaly." Jasmine felt heat rise in her cheeks. "That's not appropriate." "Probably not," he agreed, "but it's honest." Their server returned with the drinks, providing a welcome interruption to the tension building between them. Jasmine took a sip of her coffee, using the moment to try to regain her equilibrium. "Look," she said when they were alone again, "I don't know what kind of relationship you're used to having with your marketing consultants, but I maintain strict professional boundaries with all my clients." "All your clients," Brad repeated thoughtfully. "So this is just standard operating procedure for you? No personal connections, no getting to know the people you work with?" "That's right," she said firmly, though something in his tone made her defensive. "Interesting." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through it for a moment. "Because according to my research, you attended the wedding of your client from the Meridian campaign last year, and you went to that restaurant owner's daughter's birthday party after you turned around his business." Jasmine stared at him, caught off guard. "How do you—" "I told you I researched your work thoroughly." Brad set his phone aside and leaned forward slightly. "You don't just create campaigns, Jasmine. You build relationships. It's what makes you so good at what you do." The way he said her name, dropping the formal address without asking permission, sent a shiver down her spine. "That's different." "How?" "Because I didn't—" She stopped herself before she could finish the sentence, but Brad's knowing look suggested he understood exactly what she'd been about to say. "Because I didn't kiss them." "Right," he said quietly. "You didn't." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken acknowledgement of what lay beneath their professional conversation. Jasmine felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, and Brad was holding out his hand, but she couldn't tell if he was offering to pull her to safety or encourage her to jump. "This is exactly why we need to keep things professional," she said finally. "I can't afford to let personal feelings compromise my work." "Who says they would?" Brad asked. "Maybe they'd make your work better." "That's not how it works." "How do you know? Have you ever tried it?" The question hung in the air between them, challenging and direct. Jasmine realized she was gripping her coffee cup so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "Mr. Thomas," she began, but he held up a hand to stop her. "Okay," he said, his voice gentler now. "I can see I'm making you uncomfortable, and that's not my intention. You're right. We should keep things professional." Relief and disappointment warred in her chest. "Thank you. But," he continued, and her relief evaporated, I want you to know that I chose your firm before I knew you worked there. Richard recommended you based purely on your professional reputation, and everything I learned about your work convinced me you were the right person for this project. I appreciate that, she said carefully. So, whatever personal anomaly happened between us, it doesn't change the fact that I have complete confidence in your professional abilities. Jasmine nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Brad signaled for the check, and she felt a mixture of relief and regret that their meeting was ending. She'd gotten through it, maintained her professional boundaries, and established the ground rules for their working relationship. So why did she feel like she'd lost something important? As they stood to leave, Brad's hand brushed her elbow as he helped her with her jacket. The touch was brief and could have been accidental, but when she looked up at him, the heat in his eyes suggested otherwise. I'll have my assistant send over the project timeline tomorrow, she said, stepping back to create distance between them. Sounds good. Brad's smile was perfectly professional, but there was something in his expression that made her think this conversation was far from over. Thank you for your time today, Ms. Cole. I look forward to working with you. As she walked to her car, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just agreed to something much more dangerous than a marketing campaign. And the terrifying part, some secret part of her, was looking forward to finding out just how dangerous it might be. The problem with building walls, Maya, is that sometimes the right person makes you want to tear them down yourself. Jasmine spent the entire weekend convincing herself that Friday's coffee meeting had gone perfectly. She'd maintained professional boundaries, established clear expectations, and proven to herself that she could work with Brad Thomas without letting their personal history interfere. So why did she find herself checking her phone every 10 minutes, wondering if he might call? By Monday morning, she'd managed to push those thoughts aside and focus on what she did best, creating marketing magic. Her preliminary campaign proposal for Thomas Innovation Group was shaping up to be some of her finest work, a sophisticated blend of emotional storytelling and strategic positioning that would position Brad's platform as not just another tech solution, but as a catalyst for human connection in the digital age. She was putting the finishing touches on her presentation when Maya appeared in her office doorway, coffee in hand, and a knowing look on her face. Okay, spill, Maya said, settling into the chair across from Jasmine's desk. Spill what? Jasmine asked, not looking up from her laptop. Whatever's been making you glow for the past week. And don't say it's a new skincare routine because I know you better than that. Jasmine's fingers paused over the keyboard. I'm not glowing. Jazz, honey, you're practically luminescent. Plus, you've been humming while you work, which you only do when something good is happening in your life. Maya leaned forward, her dark eyes sparkling with curiosity. So who is he? There's no he, Jasmine protested, but she could feel heat rising in her cheeks. Uh-huh. Had I supposed that mystery man from the party just evaporated into thin air? Before Jasmine could respond, her desk phone rang. She grabbed it gratefully, thankful for the interruption. Jasmine Cole. Ms. Cole, this is Brad Thomas. His voice was crisp and professional, but something in her stomach still fluttered at the sound. I was wondering if we could schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss your preliminary findings. Maya's eyebrows shot up and she mouthed, "Is that him?" Jasmine waved her away with a frown. "Of course," Jasmine said into the phone. "When would be convenient for you?" "Actually, I was hoping we could meet at my office this time. I'd like to show you the platform firsthand so you can better understand what we're working with." The suggestion was perfectly reasonable. Seeing the product in action would definitely help her refine the marketing strategy. But something about the idea of being in his space, his territory, made her nervous. "That makes sense," she heard herself saying. "When would work for you? How about today, say 3 o'clock? Maya was now making exaggerated gestures, clearly trying to eavesdrop on the conversation. Jasmine turned her chair to face the window, lowering her voice. "Today should be fine. Can you send me the address?" "I'll text it to you," Brad said, and she could hear something in his voice that sounded almost like satisfaction. "I'll see you at 3, Ms. Cole." After she hung up, Maya immediately pounced. "That was him, wasn't it? The mystery man from the party." "It's complicated," Jasmine said, which was both the truth and a massive understatement. "Complicated how? Is he married? Commitment phobic? Bad in bed?" "Maya," Jasmine's face burned. "It's not like that. He's a client." Maya's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "Oh, Jazz, you didn't." "I didn't what? Please tell me you didn't kiss a client at that party." Jasmine's silence was answer enough. Maya groaned and buried her face in her hands. "Actually," Jasmine said defensively, "technically he wasn't a client when I kissed him. I didn't know he was going to become one. That's not better, Maya exclaimed. That's worse. That's like cosmic comedy worse. It's fine, Jasmine insisted. We're keeping things completely professional. What happened at the party was just a momentary lapse in judgment. Maya studied her friend's face with the sharp perception that came from years of friendship. And how's that working out for you? Perfectly, Jasmine lied. Thomas Innovation Group occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek glass building in downtown LA, with views that stretched from the Hollywood Hills to the Pacific Ocean. As Jasmine rode the elevator to the 20th floor, she tried to calm her nerves by reviewing her notes, but her hands seemed determined to shake. The elevator doors opened to reveal a modern reception area that managed to be both impressive and welcoming. Warm wood accents softened the industrial design, and living walls of greenery created intimate conversation spaces throughout the open floor plan. Ms. Cole? A young woman with short auburn hair and a warm smile approached. I'm Lindsay, Mr. Thomas's assistant. He's waiting for you in his office. Jasmine followed Lindsay through the workspace, noting the collaborative atmosphere and the obvious energy of a company where people genuinely enjoyed their work. Employees looked up and smiled as they passed, and she could hear the hum of productive conversation mixed with occasional laughter. Right through here, Lindsay said, gesturing toward a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows. Brad was standing behind his desk when she entered, but this time he wasn't looking out at the view. He was looking directly at her, and the intensity in his blue-green eyes made her step falter slightly. Jasmine, he said, and the way he said her name, warm, personal, familiar, sent awareness shooting through her system. Thank you for coming. Of course, she replied, gripping her portfolio tighter. I'm looking forward to seeing the platform. Brad's office was a study in controlled sophistication. The furniture was modern but comfortable, and personal touches, a vintage camera on a bookshelf, framed photos of what looked like family gatherings, a small sculpture that seemed more artistic than corporate, suggested a man who valued both aesthetics and genuine connection. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? Brad asked, moving around his desk. I'm fine, thank you. Please sit, he said, gesturing to a seating area near the windows rather than the formal chairs in front of his desk. As they settled into the comfortable chairs, Jasmine was acutely aware of how the informal setting changed the dynamic between them. In conference rooms and coffee shops, she could hide behind professional protocols. Here, in his personal space, those barriers felt more fragile. So, she said, pulling out her tablet, you wanted to show me the platform? In a minute, Brad said, and something in his tone made her look up. First, I owe you an apology. For what? For putting you in an uncomfortable position on Friday. You were right to insist on keeping things professional, and I shouldn't have pushed. Jasmine studied his face, looking for signs of insincerity, but his expression seemed genuinely contrite. I appreciate that. Good. Brad smiled, but it was different from his usual confident grin, more tentative, almost vulnerable. Because I really do want this project to succeed, and I need you to be comfortable working with me. I am, she said, though they both knew it was only partially true. Glad to hear it. Brad stood and moved to his computer. Ready for the demo? For the next hour, Brad walked her through the platform, and Jasmine found herself genuinely impressed. The technology was intuitive and elegant, designed to facilitate genuine collaboration rather than just digital communication. But more than the software itself, she was struck by Brad's passion for his work and his genuine desire to help people connect more meaningfully. This is incredible, she said as he finished the presentation. The potential applications are endless. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Brad's face lit up with excitement. I knew from your previous campaigns that you understand how to connect with people on an emotional level, not just a transactional one. You really did research my work thoroughly, Jasmine observed. I told you, I don't do anything halfway. There was something in the way he said it that made her think he wasn't just talking about business. As if sensing the shift in atmosphere, Brad moved back to his chair, maintaining a careful distance. So, what are your initial thoughts on positioning? Jasmine launched into her preliminary strategy, grateful to be back on safer professional ground. She outlined her vision for the campaign, the key messaging pillars, and the target audience analysis. Brad listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and offering insights that showed he understood both his product and his market. They were deep in discussion about brand differentiation when Brad's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it and frowned. I'm sorry, he said. I need to take this call, emergency with one of our investors. Do you mind waiting a few minutes? Of course not. As Brad stepped out to take his call, Jasmine found herself alone in his office. She tried to focus on her notes, but her attention kept drifting to the personal details scattered around the room. The photos on his desk showed him with an older couple, who were obviously his parents, and with a group of friends at what looked like a college reunion. In one candid shot, he was laughing at something off-camera, and the genuine joy on his face made her chest tighten. She was studying a photo of him rock climbing when she heard his voice in the hallway, raised in what sounded like frustration. Told you the timeline wasn't realistic from the beginning. I'm not going to compromise the product quality just to meet an arbitrary deadline. Jasmine couldn't help but be impressed by his conviction. Too many executives she'd worked with were willing to sacrifice their vision for the sake of investor demands. Yes, I understand the financial implications, but his voice was getting closer, and she quickly looked away from the photos, not wanting him to catch her snooping. When he returned to the office, his jaw was tight with tension. Everything okay? She asked, genuinely concerned. Brad ran a hand through his hair, disrupting the carefully styled waves. Investor drama. Some people think they can buy their way into creative control. That must be frustrating. It is. He settled back into his chair, but she could see the stress in the set of his shoulders. Sorry about that. Where were we? Brand positioning, she said gently. But if you need to deal with this... No, Brad said firmly. This is important too. More important, actually. If we don't get the messaging right, it won't matter what the investors think. They worked for another 30 minutes, but Jasmine could tell Brad was distracted. When he mentioned the same positioning point for the third time, she decided to call it. Why don't we continue this tomorrow, she suggested. You clearly have a lot on your plate right now. Brad looked like he was about to protest, then seemed to think better of it. You're probably right. I'm not giving you my full attention, and you deserve better than that. As she gathered her things, Jasmine found herself hesitating. The professional thing to do was leave and schedule a follow-up meeting through Lindsay, but something about the tension in Brad's shoulders and the way he was staring out at the city skyline made her pause. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I think you're right to protect your vision. Too many great ideas get watered down by committee. Brad turned to look at her, surprise flickering across his features. Thank you, that means more than you know. Their eyes met and held, and for a moment, the careful professional distance they'd maintained all afternoon seemed to evaporate. Jasmine could see exhaustion and frustration in his face, but also determination and passion. He looked like a man fighting for something he believed in, and she found herself wanting to help him win that fight. Jasmine, he said softly, and the way he said her name made her pulse quicken. I should go, she said quickly, but she didn't move. You should, he agreed, but he didn't look away. The air between them seemed charged with possibility, and Jasmine felt herself leaning slightly forward before she caught herself. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, the way he made her forget her own rules. Tomorrow, she said, forcing herself to step back. We'll finish this tomorrow. Tomorrow, Brad agreed, but his eyes said something entirely different. As she walked to the elevator, Jasmine's heart was pounding. She'd managed to maintain professional boundaries, but barely, and the worst part was that she wasn't sure she wanted to anymore. The man was going to be the death of her professional reputation, and if she wasn't careful, maybe her heart too. There comes a moment when pretending becomes harder than admitting the truth. Jasmine couldn't sleep. She'd tried everything: chamomile tea, meditation apps, counting backwards from 100 in 3 different languages. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Brad's face from that afternoon, the vulnerability in his expression when he talked about protecting his vision, the way his eyes had held hers in that charged moment before she'd fled his office. At 2 a.m. she gave up and padded to her kitchen in bare feet and an oversized UCLA t-shirt. If sleep wasn't going to happen, she might as well be productive. She could work on the Thomas Innovation campaign, refine her strategy, maybe even start drafting the creative brief. But as she settled at her kitchen island with her laptop, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Can't sleep either, Brad. Jasmine stared at the message, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. She should ignore it. Professional boundaries, remember? But her fingers seemed to have other ideas. How did you get this number? His response came quickly. I have my ways. Lindsay gave it to me from your business card. Despite everything, Jasmine found herself smiling. It's late. It is. Want to grab coffee? I know a place that's open 24 hours. Every rational part of her mind screamed that this was a terrible idea. It was 2 a.m., she was in her pajamas, and meeting a client for middle-of-the-night coffee was so far outside her professional boundaries, it wasn't even visible from there. "I'm not dressed for coffee," she typed back. "Neither am I. Hence the beauty of 24-hour diners. Nobody judges anyone at 2 a.m. Jasmine looked down at her reflection in her laptop screen. Her hair was piled into a messy bun. Her face was free of makeup, and she was wearing clothes that were definitely not meant for public consumption. She looked real, unguarded, like the version of herself she'd been at the party, before professional considerations had complicated everything. Before she could talk herself out of it, she was typing, "Mel's Diner on Sunset. See you in 20 minutes." Mel's Diner at 2 a.m. was a study in LA's beautiful weirdness. The fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh relief, highlighting an eclectic mix of night shift workers, insomniacs, and people whose stories were probably better left untold. It was the kind of place where no one looked twice at a woman in pajama pants and a t-shirt, or a man in jeans and a wrinkled button-down. Jasmine spotted Brad immediately. He was sitting in a corner booth, his usually perfect hair disheveled and stubble darkening his jaw. He looked tired, human, and somehow more attractive than he had any right to be at this ungodly hour. "I can't believe I'm here," she said, as she slid into the booth across from him. "I can't believe you came," Brad replied, his smile grateful and a little surprised. "Thank you." A waitress with pink hair and multiple piercings appeared with coffee without being asked, the kind of intuitive service that came from years of dealing with the 2 a.m. crowd. "So," Jasmine said, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Tough day." Brad laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. "You could say that. 3 different investors called today, all with brilliant suggestions for how to improve my platform. Apparently I should make it more like Slack, more like Zoom, and more like something that doesn't exist yet, but should revolutionize everything." Ah, the classic, make it like X, but completely different feedback. Exactly. Brad's eyes lit up with appreciation for her understanding. "You get it. I've been there. I once had a client who wanted their restaurant to be like McDonald's but classier, like Michelin star but more casual, like a sports bar but family-friendly. What did you do? I asked them to describe their perfect dining experience, not in comparison to anything else, but just what they dreamed about." Jasmine found herself leaning forward, caught up in the memory. Turns out they wanted a place where their grandfather could bring his buddies for coffee and their daughter could bring her kids for lunch. Same space, different times of day. We built the whole campaign around the idea of a place that adapts to your life, not the other way around. Brad was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "That's brilliant. It worked. The restaurant's been packed ever since." She paused, suddenly aware of how naturally she'd shared the story, how comfortable this felt. "But enough about my clients. What's your perfect platform? Not what the investors want, not what the market research says. What keeps you up at night dreaming?" Something shifted in Brad's expression, a guardedness falling away. "You really want to know?" "I do." Brad was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, more personal than she'd ever heard it. "I want to build something that helps people really see each other, not just their work selves, not just their professional personas, but who they actually are." He looked up at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "I spent years in corporate environments where everyone was performing all the time, where genuine connection was seen as unprofessional, where showing vulnerability was considered weakness." Jasmine felt something tight in her chest, loosening. "That sounds lonely." It was. Brad's admission was quiet, honest. "I had colleagues, not friends. I had professional relationships, not real ones. I was successful, but I was also empty." "What changed?" "I realized I didn't want to build a company that perpetuated that isolation. I wanted to create something that encouraged people to be human at work, to build real relationships with their colleagues." He smiled, and it was different from his professional smiles. More vulnerable, more real. "Probably sounds naive." "It sounds hopeful," Jasmine said softly, "and exactly like something the world needs more of." Their eyes met across the table, and she felt that same electric awareness that had drawn her to him at the party. But this time, it wasn't just physical attraction. It was recognition, seeing something in him that resonated with something in her. "Can I ask you something?" Brad said. "Sure. What keeps you up at night? What do you dream about when you're not thinking about campaigns and client goals?" The question caught her off guard. When was the last time someone had asked her about her dreams, not her professional goals? She started, then stopped. I don't know. I used to dream about changing the world through storytelling, about helping brands tell stories that actually mattered. But somewhere along the way, I think I forgot to ask what mattered to me. What mattered to you? Past tense. Jasmine considered the question, surprised by how difficult it was to answer. Connection, I think. Helping people see themselves in stories, feel less alone in the world. She paused, realizing how similar her answer was to his. Maybe that's why your platform resonates with me. It's trying to solve the same problem I've been trying to solve, just from a different angle. Different angles, same goal, Brad said quietly. Maybe. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of their confessions settling between them. Jasmine felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with her pajama pants and everything to do with the fact that she'd just revealed more about herself than she had to anyone in months. "This is dangerous," she said finally. "What is?" "This. Talking like this. Getting to know you as a person instead of just a client." Brad leaned back against the booth, studying her face. "Why is that dangerous?" "Because I have rules about this kind of thing. Professional boundaries, clear separations between work and personal life. And how's that working out for you?" The question was gentle, but it hit like a punch to the stomach. Jasmine thought about her empty apartment, her careful routines, her successful but solitary life. "It's working fine," she said, but even she could hear how unconvincing it sounded. "Is it?" Brad's voice was soft, non-judgmental. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've built walls so high you can't see over them anymore." "Those walls protect me," Jasmine said defensively. "From what?" "From making mistakes, from getting hurt, from letting my personal feelings compromise my professional judgment." "From living," Brad added quietly. The words hung between them, heavy with truth she didn't want to acknowledge. Jasmine felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back, furious with herself for being so transparent. "You don't know me well enough to make that judgment," she said. "Maybe not," Brad agreed. "But I know what it looks like to hide behind professional success, because it's safer than risking real connection. I did it for years. And look how well that worked out," Jasmine said, gesturing around the diner. "Here you are at 2 a.m., unable to sleep because your investors are driving you crazy." "Here I am at 2 a.m., Brad corrected, having the most honest conversation I've had in months with someone who makes me remember why I started this company in the first place. Jasmine felt her carefully constructed defenses crumbling. "Brad, I know this complicates things," he said, reaching across the table to touch her hand. "I know it goes against your rules and your professional boundaries, but I can't pretend that what's happening between us is just business." His touch was warm and gentle, and she found herself unable to pull away. "It has to be just business." "Does it?" Brad's thumb traced across her knuckles, sending awareness shooting up her arm. "Because I've been thinking about that kiss every day since it happened. I've been thinking about the way you looked at me before you ran away from the party, and the way you looked at me in my office today. How did I look at you?" The question came out as barely a whisper, like you wanted to kiss me again. The truth of it hit her like a physical blow. She did want to kiss him again. She wanted to lean across this table and taste the coffee on his lips and forget about every rule she'd ever made for herself. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she said, but she didn't pull her hand away. "What, feeling something real?" "Compromising my professional integrity." "How is being honest about your feelings compromising your integrity?" Brad asked. "If anything, isn't pretending you don't feel something the real compromise?" Jasmine stared at him, her heart pounding. Everything he was saying made sense, but it also terrified her. She'd built her entire adult life around the principle that personal feelings had no place in professional relationships. "I can't," she whispered. "Can't what?" "I can't do this. I can't blur the lines like this. I can't risk everything I've worked for." Brad was quiet for a long moment, his hand still covering hers. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but determined. "What if I told you that you wouldn't be risking anything? What if I told you that getting to know you as a person, seeing your passion for your work, and your genuine care for the stories you tell, only makes me more confident that you're the right person for this project? And what if it doesn't work out between us personally?" Jasmine asked. "What if we try this and it ruins everything? What if we don't try and spend the rest of our lives wondering what might have been?" The question hit her like lightning, illuminating corners of her heart she'd kept carefully dark. When was the last time she'd taken a real risk? When was the last time she'd chosen possibility over safety? Before she could lose her nerve, she turned her hand over under his, threading their fingers together. "This is crazy," she said. Probably, Brad agreed, his smile soft and hopeful. I don't do crazy. Maybe it's time to start. And as their fingers intertwined across a sticky diner table at 3 a.m., Jasmine realized that maybe some walls were meant to be torn down. The scariest part about tearing down walls is what you might find on the other side. Jasmine woke up with sunlight streaming through her bedroom windows and the strange sensation that everything in her world had shifted overnight. It took her a moment to remember why. The diner, the conversation, the way Brad's hand had felt wrapped around hers as they'd talked until nearly dawn. She'd gotten home at 5 a.m., her heart full and her mind spinning with the implications of what had happened between them. They hadn't kissed again, hadn't crossed any obvious physical lines, but somehow sharing coffee and honest conversation in a fluorescent-lit diner had felt more intimate than any kiss. Her phone buzzed with a text, and her pulse quickened when she saw Brad's name. Thank you for last night. I slept better than I have in weeks. B. She stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Everything felt different now, charged with possibility and terrifying in its newness. Before she could overthink it, she typed back, Me too. See you at the office today? Actually, I was wondering if you'd like to continue our strategy session somewhere else. I have an idea. What kind of idea? Trust me? Those two words sent a shiver of anticipation through her. Trusting Brad felt dangerous and necessary in equal measure. Okay, where? I'll pick you up at 10. Dress casual. Jasmine looked at the clock, 8:30 a.m. That gave her just enough time to shower, change, and have a minor panic attack about what dress casual meant and why she'd agreed to let a client pick her up at her apartment. Maya's voice echoed in her head. That's not better, that's worse. But as Jasmine stood under the hot spray of her shower, she realized she didn't care about worse. For the first time in years, she was choosing possibility over safety, and it felt terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. At exactly 10 a.m. there was a knock at her door. Jasmine had changed clothes 3 times before settling on dark jeans, a soft cream sweater and ankle boots. Casual but put together, professional but approachable. She was still questioning her choices when she opened the door. Brad stood in her hallway wearing jeans and a navy Henley that hugged his chest in a way that made her mouth go dry. His hair was still slightly damp, and he smelled like soap and something uniquely him that made her want to step closer. Good morning, he said, his smile warm and a little uncertain, as if he too was navigating uncharted territory. Morning, she replied, grabbing her purse and jacket. So where are we going for this mysterious strategy session? You'll see, Brad said, leading her toward the elevator. But I think you'll like it. 20 minutes later, they were walking through the Santa Monica Pier, the ocean breeze carrying the scent of salt and possibility. The morning crowd was light, joggers, dog walkers, and early tourists taking advantage of the perfect California weather. A strategy session at the beach? Jasmine asked, though she was charmed despite herself. Sometimes the best ideas come when you're not sitting in a conference room, Brad explained, guiding her toward a small cafe overlooking the ocean. Plus, I wanted to show you something. The cafe was one of those hidden gems that locals guarded jealously. Great coffee, simple food, and panoramic views of the Pacific. They ordered at the counter and found a table on the deck where the sound of waves provided a natural soundtrack to their conversation. This is beautiful, Jasmine said, watching surfers catch morning waves in the distance. I come here when I need to think, Brad admitted. There's something about the ocean that puts things in perspective. I can see why. She turned to look at him, struck again by how different he seemed outside the corporate environment. So what did you want to show me? Brad pulled out his phone and opened an app. This is the platform in its current beta form. But instead of showing you features and functionality, I want to show you why it matters. He turned the screen toward her, and she saw a simple interface with what looked like a team collaboration space. But as he navigated through it, she began to see what made it special. See this? He pointed to a section labeled Personal Check-ins. It's not just about project updates. Team members can share how they're actually doing, if they're struggling with something, if they're excited about a new idea, if they need support. Jasmine watched as he clicked through sample conversations that felt genuine and human in a way most workplace communication didn't. And this, Brad continued, opening another section, is for celebrating non-work achievements. Someone's kid took their first steps. Someone ran their first marathon. Someone learned to play guitar. The idea is that work doesn't happen in a vacuum. We're whole people, and understanding each other as humans makes us better collaborators. As he explained the platform's philosophy, Jasmine felt her professional excitement building. But more than that, she understood now why Brad was so passionate about protecting his vision from investor interference. "This isn't just collaboration software," she said slowly. "It's relationship-building technology." "Exactly." Brad's face lit up with the kind of enthusiasm that was impossible to fake. "I don't want to build another tool that makes work more efficient. I want to build something that makes work more human." Jasmine leaned back in her chair, her mind already spinning with campaign possibilities. "The marketing potential for this is incredible. Not just B2B messaging, but something that speaks to what people are really craving in their work lives. Which is connection, authenticity, the ability to be themselves instead of just their job titles." She pulled out her own phone and started taking notes. "We could build a campaign around the idea that work doesn't have to be separate from life. It can be an extension of who you are." Brad watched her work, and when she looked up, there was something in his expression that made her pulse quicken. "What?" she asked. "You're brilliant," he said simply. "The way your mind works, the way you see possibilities, it's incredible to watch." Heat flooded her cheeks. "It's just my job." "No," Brad said firmly. "It's not just your job. It's who you are. You're a storyteller, Jasmine. You see the human truth in everything, and you know how to help other people see it too." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tight with emotion. When was the last time someone had seen her work not just as professional competence, but as an expression of who she was? "Thank you," she said softly. They worked for the next 2 hours, their conversation flowing seamlessly between strategy and personal revelation. Brad shared stories about his corporate years, the moments of isolation that had inspired his platform. Jasmine talked about campaigns that had mattered to her, the clients who had trusted her to tell their stories authentically. By the time they ordered lunch, Jasmine realized she'd forgotten to be nervous about blurring professional boundaries. This felt natural, right? Like two people who understood each other working towards something meaningful together. "Can I ask you something?" Brad said as they shared an order of fish tacos. "Sure. Last night you said you were afraid of compromising your professional integrity, but sitting here working with you like this, doesn't it feel like the opposite? Like we're both bringing our best selves to this project?" Jasmine considered the question, surprised by how easily she could answer it. "Yes, it does feel like that." "So what changed?" "I think," she paused, searching for the right words. "I think I was confusing professional boundaries with emotional ones. I thought keeping things strictly business would protect me, but really it was just keeping me from doing my best work. Because your best work comes from caring about the people you work with." Something like that. She looked out at the ocean, then back at him. "You make me want to care, Brad. About your platform, about your success, about—" She trailed off, not quite ready to finish that sentence. "About what?" he prompted gently. "About you," she admitted quietly. "And that scares me." Brad reached across the table and took her hand, the gesture feeling both familiar and electric. "It scares me too, but maybe being scared means we're heading towards something worth protecting." "Is that what this is? Something worth protecting?" "I think it could be." His thumb traced across her knuckles. "If we're brave enough to find out." Jasmine felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by the tenderness in his voice, and the possibility stretching out before them like the endless ocean. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to care about someone and work with them without losing myself." "Maybe you don't lose yourself," Brad said softly. "Maybe you find a version of yourself you didn't know existed." As if to prove his point, the ocean breeze lifted her hair, and she felt lighter than she had in months. Sitting here with Brad, talking about work and life and everything in between, she felt like the most authentic version of herself she'd been in years. "Okay," she said, her voice stronger now. "Okay, what?" "Okay, let's be brave. Let's see what happens when we stop pretending this is just business." Brad's smile was brilliant, and when he lifted their joined hands to brush a kiss across her knuckles, Jasmine felt the last of her walls crumble. Maybe some risks were worth taking. Maybe some connections were worth protecting. And maybe, just maybe, some love stories were worth rewriting all your rules. Sometimes the moment you get what you want is when you realize how much you have to lose. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and electric tension. Jasmine found herself looking forward to their meetings with an anticipation that had nothing to do with marketing strategies and everything to do with the way Brad's eyes lit up when he saw her, or how his hand would brush hers when he handed her documents. They maintained professional facades during official meetings, but their coffee breaks grew longer, their lunch discussions more personal, and their text conversations stretched late into the night. It was like conducting a courtship in secret, every glance and touch carrying extra weight, because it had to be carefully measured. Jasmine was putting the finishing touches on the campaign presentation when Maya burst into her office without knocking, a move that usually signaled either very good news or impending disaster. "We need to talk," Maya announced, closing the door behind her and settling into the chair across from Jasmine's desk with the determined expression of someone preparing for an intervention. "Good morning to you too," Jasmine said, not looking up from her laptop. "And yes, you may come in." "Don't deflect. You know why I'm here." Jasmine finally looked up, taking in her friend's concerned expression. "Actually, I don't." "What's wrong?" "What's wrong is that you've been floating around here like you're in some kind of romantic comedy for 2 weeks. And while I'm happy you're happy, I'm also worried you're about to make a career-ending mistake." "I don't know what you're talking about." Maya pulled out her phone and scrolled through it. "Really? Because Linda from accounting mentioned that you and a certain gorgeous client were seen having a very cozy lunch at that little seafood place in Santa Monica. And apparently there was hand-holding involved." Jasmine's stomach dropped. "Linda from accounting? Who has a cousin who works at the restaurant, and who apparently has excellent eyesight and a big mouth?" Maya leaned forward, her expression softening. "Jazz, I love you and I want you to be happy, but this could blow up your entire career if it goes wrong." "It won't go wrong," Jasmine said, but even as she said it, she felt a flutter of uncertainty. "How can you be sure? You've known this man for what, 3 weeks? And he's not just any man, he's a client, a big client, the kind of client who could make or break this company if things get messy." Jasmine set down her coffee cup, her hands suddenly unsteady. "It's not like that with Brad, he's not like that." "Maybe not," Maya said gently. "But what happens if it doesn't work out? What happens to your professional reputation? To the company? To this campaign you've been pouring your heart into?" The questions hung in the air like accusations, and Jasmine felt the familiar anxiety begin to creep back in. She'd been so caught up in the magic of whatever was happening with Brad that she'd pushed aside the very real, practical concerns that had kept her safe for years. She started, then stopped. "I don't know. That's what scares me," Maya said softly. "You always know, you always have a plan, an exit strategy, a way to protect yourself. But with this guy, you're flying blind." Before Jasmine could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Brad. "Looking forward to the presentation this afternoon. Proud of the work we've done together." The word "together" sent warmth through her chest, but it also highlighted the problem Maya was pointing out. How much of her enthusiasm for this campaign was about the work and how much was about Brad? "I can see it on your face," Maya said quietly. "He just texted you, didn't he?" Jasmine nodded, feeling exposed. "Jazz, I've never seen you like this about anyone. Which is beautiful, but it's also terrifying. Promise me you'll be careful." "I will," Jasmine said, though she wasn't entirely sure what being careful meant anymore. The presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the main conference room, with Richard, Brad, and 2 other members of the Thomas Innovation team in attendance. Jasmine had spent the morning rehearsing, polishing her slides, and trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in her stomach that had nothing to do with presenting and everything to do with Maya's warnings. She arrived at the conference room 15 minutes early, needing time to set up and compose herself. The campaign was good. No, it was brilliant. She'd poured everything she understood about human connection and authentic storytelling into a strategy that positioned Brad's platform not just as software, but as a catalyst for meaningful workplace relationships. "You're early," came Brad's voice from the doorway. Jasmine looked up from her laptop to find him watching her with an expression that was warm, but carefully neutral, the face he wore when they weren't alone. "I like to be prepared," she said, falling into the same professional tone. "One of the many things I admire about you," Brad said, closing the door behind him and moving to stand beside her at the presentation table. The moment they were alone, the atmosphere shifted. He was close enough that she could smell his cologne, could see the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. "Nervous?" he asked quietly. "A little," she admitted. "I want this to be perfect." "It will be. I've seen what you can do when you care about something." His hand found hers on the table, fingers intertwining. "And I know you care about this." The simple touch sent electricity up her arm, but it also made Maya's warnings echo in her head. "What happens if it doesn't work out?" "Brad," she began, then stopped as voices in the hallway indicated the arrival of the other meeting attendees. He squeezed her hand once before letting go, stepping back to create appropriate distance, just as Richard entered with the Thomas Innovation team. "Afternoon, everyone," Richard said cheerfully. "I think we're all eager to see what Jasmine has put together." The next hour passed in a blur of slides, statistics, and strategic recommendations. Jasmine presented with her usual confidence and passion, watching the faces around the table for reactions. Richard looked pleased. The Thomas innovation team seemed engaged, and Brad watched her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Not just professional appreciation, but something deeper, more personal. The way someone looked at a person they were proud of, someone they cared about. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment before Brad spoke. "This is exceptional work," he said, his voice carefully controlled, but his eyes telling a different story. "You've captured exactly what we're trying to achieve and presented it in a way that's both emotionally compelling and strategically sound." "I agree," said Jennifer Schofield, Brad's VP of Product Development. "The messaging around authentic workplace relationships really resonates. It's exactly the kind of differentiation we need in this market." Richard beamed. "Outstanding work, Jasmine. This is exactly why we chose your firm for this project." As the meeting wrapped up and people began to file out, Brad lingered, making small talk with Richard while obviously waiting for an opportunity to speak with her privately. "Jasmine," he said when they were finally alone, "that was incredible. You've taken everything we talked about and turned it into something that could actually change how people think about work." "It's what I do," she said, but she was glowing under his praise. "No, it's who you are." He stepped closer, and she could see the desire in his eyes to touch her, to celebrate this moment properly. "I know we have to be careful here, but I want you to know that working with you on this has been—" "What?" she prompted when he trailed off. "The best part of building this company," he finished softly. The sincerity in his voice made her chest tight with emotion. This was exactly what Maya had warned her about. The blurring of lines, the confusion between professional success and personal feelings. "Brad," she began, but was interrupted by the conference room door opening. Tom Martinez stuck his head in, his expression urgent. "Sorry to interrupt, but Jasmine, there's something you need to see." Tom's tone sent immediate alarm bells ringing. "What is it?" "There's an article. About the company. About—" He glanced at Brad, then back at her. "About you." Jasmine felt the blood drain from her face. "What kind of article?" Tom pulled out his phone and handed it to her. The headline on the LA Business Journal website made her stomach drop. "Conflict of interest? Marketing consultant's personal relationship with major client raises questions." Below was a photo of her and Brad, holding hands at the Santa Monica Cafe, their faces clearly visible, their intimate conversation obvious even in a still image. Jasmine's hands shook as she read the opening paragraph. "Sources close to Cole and Martinez Marketing Solutions confirm that lead consultant Jasmine Cole has been conducting a personal relationship with client Brad Thomas, CEO of Thomas Innovation Group, raising questions about professional ethics and the integrity of their business partnership." "Oh, God," she whispered. Brad took the phone from her trembling hands, his jaw tightening as he read. "This is bullshit. Anonymous sources? Speculation disguised as journalism?" "It doesn't matter if it's true or not," Jasmine said, her voice hollow. "The damage is done. My reputation, the company's reputation." "Jasmine," Tom said quietly, "Richard wants to see you in his office. Now." She looked at Brad, seeing her own panic reflected in his eyes. Everything Maya had warned her about was coming true, and it was happening faster than she could have imagined. "This will be okay," Brad said, reaching for her hand, but she pulled away. "No," she said, her professional instincts kicking in with painful clarity. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. This is why we shouldn't have crossed that line." "You don't mean that." But as Jasmine looked around the conference room, at the presentation materials scattered on the table, at Tom's worried expression, at the phone displaying the article that could destroy everything she'd worked for, she felt the walls she'd torn down over the past few weeks, rebuilding themselves with frightening speed. Maybe some risks weren't worth taking after all. Sometimes protecting what you love means pushing it away, even when it breaks your heart. Richard Hawthorne's office felt smaller than usual, the walls seeming to close in as Jasmine sat across from his imposing mahogany desk. The LA Business Journal article was printed out and lying between them like evidence in a trial, and Richard's expression was a careful mask of professionalism that didn't quite hide his disappointment. "Jasmine," he began, his voice measured, "I've built this company on a reputation for integrity and professional excellence. In 15 years, we've never had a scandal like this." "Richard, I can explain." He held up a hand to stop her. I'm sure you can. But the question isn't whether your feelings for Mr. Thomas are genuine or whether this relationship started before or after he became a client. The question is whether we can contain the damage to both your career and this company's reputation. Jasmine felt sick. How bad is it? I've had 3 calls this morning. 2 from potential clients expressing concerns about our professional standards, and 1 from the Martinez account asking if we can guarantee that their consultant will maintain appropriate boundaries. Each word hit like a physical blow. The Martinez account was their second largest client, a relationship she'd spent 2 years building. The thought of losing them because of her personal choices made her feel physically ill. "What do you need me to do?" she asked quietly. Richard studied her face for a long moment. "I need you to decide what's more important to you, your personal relationship with Brad Thomas or your professional future with this company." The ultimatum hung in the air between them, stark and uncompromising. Jasmine had known this moment might come, but she'd hoped, foolishly apparently, that she could have both. "And if I choose my career?" she asked, though the words felt like glass in her throat. "Then you'll remove yourself from any personal involvement with Mr. Thomas. We'll complete the campaign with strict professional protocols, and we'll work on rebuilding your reputation in the industry." "And if I choose him?" Richard's expression softened slightly, revealing the genuine affection he'd always had for her. "Then I'll accept your resignation and provide you with an excellent reference." "But Jasmine, you have to understand. Walking away from this company to pursue a relationship with a client will follow you. Other firms will see it as a pattern, a risk they can't afford to take." The choice was impossible and inevitable at the same time. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd built, balanced against 2 weeks of stolen moments and the possibility of something real with Brad. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked. "The Thomas campaign launches in 3 weeks. I need your decision by tomorrow morning." As Jasmine walked back to her office on unsteady legs, she felt like she was moving through a nightmare. The hallways that had felt like home for 4 years now seemed foreign, and she could swear her colleagues were looking at her differently, some with sympathy, others with the kind of judgment that came from watching someone make a spectacular mistake. Maya was waiting in her office, her expression a mixture of concern and "I told you so" that she was clearly trying to suppress. "How bad?" Maya asked simply. "Career-ending bad," Jasmine said, slumping into her chair. "Richard's giving me until tomorrow to choose between Brad and my job." "Oh, honey." Maya came around the desk and pulled her into a fierce hug. "I'm so sorry." "You warned me," Jasmine said, her voice muffled against Maya's shoulder. "You told me exactly what would happen and I didn't listen." "Being right doesn't make me happy about it," Maya said firmly. "What are you going to do?" Before Jasmine could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from Brad. "We need to talk. Can you meet me somewhere private?" Maya saw her looking at the phone and frowned. "Maybe you shouldn't." "I have to," Jasmine said. "I owe him that much." They met at the same Santa Monica cafe where everything had started to change, though this time the ocean view felt more like a taunt than a comfort. Brad was already there when she arrived, sitting at their usual table but looking nothing like the confident CEO she'd first met. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, and there was a tension in his shoulders that spoke of sleepless hours and difficult conversations. "Thank you for coming," he said as she sat down, his voice carefully neutral. "We need to talk about how to handle this," Jasmine said, jumping straight to business, because the alternative, acknowledging the pain in his eyes, felt too dangerous. "Do we?" Brad asked quietly. "Because from your text it sounds like you've already made your decision." She'd texted him earlier with a carefully professional message about needing to discuss the situation and moving forward. Even to her own eyes it had read like a goodbye. "Brad, you have to understand." "What I understand," he interrupted, his voice gaining heat, "is that the moment things got complicated, you ran, just like you did at the party, just like you've been doing every time this gets real. That's not fair, isn't it?" Brad leaned forward, his blue-green eyes intense. 3 days ago, you were telling me you wanted to be brave, that you wanted to see what could happen between us. Now one article threatens your perfect professional reputation, and suddenly I'm the mistake you need to correct. "It's not that simple," Jasmine protested, but even as she said it, she knew he was partly right. "Then explain it to me. Help me understand why what we have isn't worth fighting for." The pain in his voice made her chest tight, but she forced herself to maintain her composure. "Because what we have is 2 weeks old, and my career is everything I've spent 10 years building. Because I worked too hard to get where I am to throw it away for a relationship that might not even last." "Might not last," Brad repeated flatly. Is that really what you think this is? Some kind of temporary infatuation? Jasmine looked out at the ocean, unable to meet his eyes. I think it's easy to confuse professional chemistry with personal connection. I think we got caught up in the excitement of working together and mistook it for something deeper. The silence that followed her words was deafening. When she finally looked back at Brad, his expression had shifted from pain to something that looked like resignation. I see, he said quietly. So everything we talked about, the late-night conversations, the way you looked at me when you thought no one was watching, the way you fit against me when we danced at that party, all of that was just professional chemistry. Brad, answer the question, Jasmine. Was any of it real for you? She wanted to lie, to make a clean break that would protect them both, but looking at his face, seeing the genuine hurt and confusion there, she couldn't do it. Yes, she whispered. It was real. Then why are you walking away? Because real doesn't pay my mortgage or build my reputation or guarantee that this company will still exist in 6 months. The words came out harsher than she intended, but they were the truth. Because I can't afford to bet my entire future on a feeling. Brad was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the table between them. When he spoke, his voice was soft but determined. What if I told you that you wouldn't have to bet your future? What if I told you that I'd cancel the contract, pay the termination fees and find another marketing firm so that you could keep your job? The offer hit her like a punch to the stomach. You'd do that? If it meant you could feel safe pursuing this relationship? Yes, in a heartbeat. Jasmine stared at him, overwhelmed by the generosity of the gesture and terrified by what it represented. If he was willing to sacrifice his campaign, something he'd told her was crucial to his company's success, what did he expect from her in return? I can't let you do that, she said. Why not? Because then you'd resent me. Maybe not today, maybe not next month, but eventually you'd look at me and remember what you gave up, and it would poison everything between us. You don't get to decide how I'll feel, Brad said firmly. You don't get to reject my choice to fight for us because you're afraid of some hypothetical future resentment. I'm trying to protect both of us. You're trying to protect yourself, Brad corrected, his voice gaining an edge. You're so terrified of being vulnerable that you'd rather walk away from something good than risk the possibility that it might hurt you. The accusation stung because it was true, but knowing it was true didn't make it less necessary. Maybe you're right, she said quietly. Maybe I am a coward, but I'm a coward with a career and a reputation and a future that doesn't depend on anyone else, and that's worth something to me. Brad studied her face for a long moment, and she could see the exact moment when he stopped fighting for them. His shoulders sagged slightly, and his expression shifted from pain to acceptance. Okay, he said finally. If that's what you want, I'll respect it. We'll finish the campaign professionally and then we'll go our separate ways. Brad? No, it's fine, he said, standing up from the table. You've made your choice clear. I just hope it's worth what you're giving up. As he walked away, Jasmine felt like she was watching her heart leave with him. Every instinct screamed at her to call him back, to tell him she'd changed her mind, to choose love over safety. But she stayed in her chair, watching him disappear into the crowd of afternoon beachgoers, and told herself she'd made the right decision, even if it felt like the worst mistake of her life. The hardest lesson to learn is that sometimes the safe choice is the one that destroys you. 2 weeks passed in a blur of grey efficiency. Jasmine threw herself into work with the kind of desperate intensity that fooled no one, least of all herself. She arrived at the office before anyone else, stayed long after the building emptied, and produced campaigns with mechanical precision that impressed clients, but felt hollow in her chest. The Thomas Innovation campaign moved forward on schedule, but now their interactions were painfully professional. Brad attended meetings with polite distance, reviewed materials with clinical detachment, and spoke to her with the kind of courtesy reserved for strangers. It was exactly what she'd said she wanted, and it was killing her. Maya watched her best friend fade away day by day. The vibrant woman who'd glowed with possibility just weeks before, replaced by someone who looked successful on the surface, but empty underneath. This has to stop, Maya said, barging into Jasmine's office on a Thursday evening to find her hunched over her laptop at 8 p.m., the remains of another skipped dinner scattered across her desk. What has to stop? Jasmine asked, not looking up from her screen. This. Maya gestured at the office around them, the empty coffee cups, the rumpled blazer hanging over her chair, the dark circles under Jasmine's eyes. You're working yourself to death, and for what? To prove that choosing your career over Brad was the right decision? I'm fine, Jasmine said automatically. You're miserable. And before you deny it, let me point out that you've lost 8 pounds, you haven't laughed in 2 weeks, and yesterday I caught you staring at your phone for 10 minutes straight. Jasmine finally looked up, and Maya was startled by the pain in her friend's eyes. What do you want me to say, Maya? That I made a mistake? That I should have chosen a 2-week relationship over everything I've built? I want you to stop pretending that what you had with Brad was just a 2-week relationship, Maya said gently. I've known you for 8 years, Jazz. I've never seen you look at anyone the way you looked at him. It doesn't matter how I looked at him, doesn't it? Maya moved closer, her voice softer now. When was the last time you were truly happy? Not professionally satisfied, not successfully achieving your goals, but genuinely, deeply happy. Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, her hands stilling on the keyboard. The morning after we went to that diner, she said finally. I woke up and for the first time in years I was excited about the day ahead, not because of work, but because I knew I was going to see him. And now I wake up and go through the motions, Jasmine admitted. I tell myself that I made the rational choice, the safe choice, but it doesn't feel safe, Maya. It feels like I'm slowly disappearing. Before Maya could respond, there was a knock on the office door. Tom Martinez appeared, his expression grim. Sorry to interrupt, he said, but there's something you both need to see. He handed Jasmine his tablet, which was open to a tech industry newsletter. The headline made her stomach drop. Thomas Innovation Group pulls major marketing campaign, cites creative differences. Jasmine read the article with growing horror. According to the report, Brad had terminated his contract with Cole and Martinez that afternoon, effective immediately. The platform launch was being delayed indefinitely while they searched for new marketing partners. He fired us? Maya asked, reading over Jasmine's shoulder. Worse, Tom said grimly. He paid the full termination fee and gave us a glowing review, but the optics are terrible. Everyone's going to think we screwed up the campaign. Jasmine's hands were shaking as she set down the tablet. I need to call him. Jazz, Maya started. No, this is my fault. He's tanking his own launch because of me, because of what happened between us. She was already reaching for her phone. I have to fix this. Brad answered on the second ring, his voice carefully neutral. Jasmine, what did you do? She asked, skipping any pretense of pleasantries. I made a business decision, Brad replied coolly. Surely you of all people can appreciate that. Don't lie to me. You're sabotaging your own company because of what happened between us. There was a pause, and when Brad spoke again, his voice was tired. I'm not sabotaging anything. I'm protecting what matters to me. Your platform matters to you. Your company matters to you. You told me. You matter to me, Brad interrupted, his careful composure cracking slightly. And working with you, pretending that what we had meant nothing, watching you look right through me in meetings, it was destroying my ability to focus on anything else. Jasmine felt tears prick her eyes. Brad, you can't do this. The launch, the campaign we worked on, will happen eventually with another firm, one where I won't spend every meeting remembering what it felt like to hold your hand. You're being ridiculous. Am I? There was heat in his voice now. You want to know what's ridiculous? Sitting in a conference room listening to you present a campaign about authentic human connection at work while pretending we're strangers. Watching you explain the importance of emotional honesty in professional relationships while you refuse to acknowledge that we have one. We don't have a relationship, Jasmine said weakly. I ended it. No, you ran from it. There's a difference. The line went quiet except for their breathing, heavy with everything they weren't saying. The campaign is good, Jasmine, Brad said finally, his voice gentler now. It's brilliant, actually, but I can't launch something about authentic connection when everything about working with you feels like a lie. What can I do? She whispered. How do I fix this? You can't, Brad said simply. You made your choice. Now, I'm making mine. After he hung up, Jasmine sat in her office staring at her phone, feeling like the walls were closing in around her. Through the window, she could see the lights of Los Angeles stretching out toward the ocean, millions of people living their lives, taking risks, choosing love over safety. He's right, isn't he? She said to Maya, who was still standing in the doorway. About all of it. What do you think? Maya asked gently. Jasmine thought about the campaign she'd created, the one that encouraged people to bring their authentic selves to work, to build real relationships with their colleagues. She thought about Brad's platform, designed to help people connect as human beings rather than just job titles. She thought about the hypocrisy of promoting authentic connection while running from the most authentic relationship she'd ever had. I think I've been an idiot, she said finally. Probably, Maya agreed. But it's not too late to fix it. Yes, it is. You saw the article. He's already moved on, found new marketing partners. Actually, Tom interrupted from the doorway, according to my sources, he hasn't signed with anyone yet. Word is he's been turning down proposals left and right, saying none of them understand his vision. Jasmine looked up sharply. What does that mean? It means maybe he's not as moved on as you think, Maya said. Maybe he's waiting for someone who actually understands what he's trying to build. Or maybe he's just being picky about his marketing firm. Jazz, Maya said, sitting on the edge of the desk, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. If you knew for certain that choosing Brad wouldn't hurt your career, that Richard would support you and the company would be fine, what would you do? The answer came without hesitation. I'd go to him, right now. I'd tell him he was right about everything and beg him to give us another chance. Then maybe the question isn't whether you can afford to choose him, Maya said quietly. Maybe the question is whether you can afford not to. Jasmine looked around her office, at the awards on the walls, the successful campaigns documented in frames, the evidence of a career built on careful choices and calculated risks. It was everything she'd thought she wanted, but sitting there now, it felt like a beautifully decorated prison. The campaign launches in a week, she said suddenly. What? Brad's campaign, the one we worked on together. He's planning to delay it. But what if I could convince him not to? Maya's eyes widened with understanding. You want to pitch him again, not pitch him. Show him. Jasmine was already moving, pulling files from her desk, her mind racing with possibilities. Show him that I understand what authentic connection means, that I'm willing to risk everything to fight for something real. That's either the most romantic gesture ever or professional suicide, Tom observed. Probably both, Jasmine agreed, but for the first time in 2 weeks she felt alive again. But some things are worth the risk, and if she was going to lose everything anyway, she might as well lose it fighting for love. True courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing love despite it. The Thomas Innovation Group offices looked different at 7 p.m. on a Friday. The bustling energy of the workday had given way to the quiet hum of after-hours dedication, and only a few lights remained on across the expansive floor. Jasmine stood in the lobby, her heart hammering against her ribs as she clutched the portfolio that represented either salvation or career suicide. She'd spent the past 18 hours working with a desperation she'd never felt before, rebuilding the campaign presentation with one crucial addition: the truth. Not just the professional truth about authentic workplace connections, but her personal truth about what it meant to choose vulnerability over safety. Ms. Cole, Lindsay appeared from the elevator bank, surprise evident on her face. I wasn't expecting you. Do you have a meeting with Mr. Thomas? Not exactly, Jasmine admitted, her voice steadier than she felt. Is he here? He's in his office, but... Lindsay paused, her expression sympathetic. I'm not sure he's taking unscheduled meetings right now. Things have been difficult since the contract termination. I know, that's why I'm here. Jasmine took a deep breath. Lindsay, I need you to do me a favor. Can you tell him that I have something to show him? Something about the campaign that he needs to see? Lindsay studied her face for a moment, then nodded. Wait here. As the elevator doors closed behind Brad's assistant, Jasmine paced the marble lobby, rehearsing words that suddenly felt inadequate. How do you apologize for breaking someone's heart out of fear? How do you convince someone to trust you when you've proven you'll run at the first sign of trouble? The elevator dinged, and Lindsay reappeared with an expression that wasn't entirely promising. He'll see you, she said carefully, but he said to tell you that if this is about business, it should go through official channels. It's not about business, Jasmine said, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true either. Brad's office felt smaller than she remembered, or maybe that was just the weight of everything unsaid between them. He stood behind his desk, his posture formal, his expression carefully neutral. Gone was the warmth she'd grown used to seeing in his eyes, replaced by the polite distance of a stranger. Jasmine, he said, his voice professionally courteous, Lindsay said you had something to show me about the campaign. I do. She moved toward his desk, setting down her portfolio with hands that trembled slightly. But first, I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. Jasmine forced herself to look directly at him, to see the hurt he was trying so hard to hide. I owe you honesty. Real honesty, not the professional version I've been hiding behind. Brad's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I thought we'd said everything we needed to say. No, we said everything I was brave enough to say at the time, but I've been thinking about something you told me once, about how you spent years performing in corporate environments, showing only your professional self while hiding who you really were. What about it? I realized I've been doing the same thing, not just at work, but with you. Even when we were together, I was performing the role of someone who had everything under control, instead of admitting that you terrified me. Terrified you? For the first time, his composed facade cracked slightly. Jasmine moved closer, her heart pounding. You made me feel things I've spent years avoiding. You made me want things I convinced myself were too risky. And when that article came out, instead of fighting for us, I used it as an excuse to run back to the safety of my carefully controlled life. Brad was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against his desk. Why are you telling me this now? Because I've spent the last 2 weeks living with the consequences of choosing safety over love, and it's been the worst 2 weeks of my life. Jasmine's voice caught slightly. Because I realized that losing my job would be painful, but losing you feels like losing a part of my soul. She saw his resolve waver, saw the flash of hope in his eyes, before he shuttered it again. Jasmine, he said carefully, I can't go through this again. I can't open myself up to you just to watch you run the next time things get complicated. I know. She opened her portfolio and pulled out a letter, her hands steady now despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. That's why I brought you this. Brad took the letter, his eyebrows drawing together as he recognized the Colin Martinez letterhead. What is this? My resignation, Jasmine said simply. Effective immediately. I'm walking away from everything I thought I wanted to prove, that what I feel for you isn't temporary or shallow or something. I'll regret when the novelty wears off. Brad's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. You resigned? 2 hours ago. Richard tried to talk me out of it. Maya thinks I've lost my mind and you're probably going to tell me I'm being ridiculous. Jasmine's voice grew stronger with each word. But for the first time in my adult life, I'm choosing with my heart instead of my head. Jasmine, you can't. Your career, everything you've worked for, will still be there in some form. Maybe not with this company, maybe not with the same prestige, but I'm good at what I do. I'll figure it out. She moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. But there's only one you, Brad, and I was an idiot to think that anything else mattered more. Brad stared at her, his professional composure completely abandoned now. You really resigned? I really resigned, and I brought you something else. She pulled out a revised presentation from her portfolio. The campaign, rebuilt from the ground up. Jasmine, I told you, just look at it, please, 5 minutes, and then if you want me to leave, I'll go and never bother you again. Brad hesitated for a moment, then nodded. 5 minutes. Jasmine opened her laptop and connected it to his wall-mounted display, her heart hammering as the first slide appeared. The opening image was a photo of 2 people holding hands across a table, the same photo that had appeared in the article that started this whole mess. Authentic connection, she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the risk she was taking, isn't just about being honest in your professional relationships. It's about being brave enough to be vulnerable, even when vulnerability might cost you everything. She clicked to the next slide, which showed the original campaign messaging alongside new copy that was more personal, more raw, more real. Your platform isn't just about workplace collaboration, she continued. It's about creating spaces where people can show up as their whole selves, their hopes, their fears, their authentic truth. And the only way to market something like that is with complete honesty about what authentic connection actually costs. Brad was silent, but she could see him leaning forward, engaging with the material in a way he hadn't during their professional presentations. This slide, Jasmine said, revealing a mock-up that featured real workplace scenarios, people celebrating each other's successes, supporting each other through difficulties, building genuine friendships alongside professional relationships, shows what's possible when we stop pretending that work and life are separate things. And this one, she clicked to the final slide, which showed a simple message. The best partnerships, professional and personal, happen when we choose courage over comfort, is what I should have remembered 2 weeks ago. She closed the laptop and turned to face him, her hands steady now despite everything riding on this moment. The campaign is brilliant, Brad said quietly. It's everything I dreamed the messaging could be. But, Jasmine prompted, hearing the hesitation in his voice, but I need to know that you're not just saying these things because you feel guilty about the contract termination. I need to know that this is about us, not about fixing a professional mistake. Jasmine took a deep breath, knowing that this was the moment that would determine everything. Brad, she said, stepping closer to him, I love you. The words hung between them, simple and complicated, and absolutely true. I love you, she repeated, her voice stronger now. I love the way you see possibility in everything, the way you believe in human connection, even when it's been used against you. I love how you listen when I talk about my work, like it matters to you personally. I love that you were willing to sacrifice your campaign to protect your heart. Brad's eyes were bright with emotion, but he didn't speak. I love you enough to give up everything I thought mattered to prove that you matter more, Jasmine continued. And I'm praying that you love me enough to give us another chance. For a moment that felt like eternity. They stared at each other across the space of his office. Then Brad moved, closing the distance between them in 2 quick strides, his hands coming up to cup her face. You impossible, brilliant, terrifying woman, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Of course I love you. I've been in love with you since that first night on the terrace when you kissed me like the world was ending. And then he was kissing her again, but this time it wasn't desperate or stolen or complicated by professional boundaries. This time it was a promise, a choice, a leap of faith taken together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Brad rested his forehead against hers. So what happens now? He asked. Now, Jasmine said, smiling through the tears she hadn't realized were falling. We figure it out together, starting with relaunching your campaign with the best marketing consultant you've ever worked with. Are you applying for the job? Brad asked, his smile matching hers. I'm applying for the life, Jasmine replied. The job is just a bonus. And as the Los Angeles skyline glittered beyond the office windows, 2 people who had almost lost each other to fear chose love instead. Messy, complicated, absolutely worth it. Love. 6 months later, sometimes the greatest risk becomes the greatest reward. The rooftop terrace of the Beverly Hills Hotel buzzed with the elegant energy of a successful product launch party. String lights twinkled overhead, casting a warm glow over the gathering of tech industry leaders, marketing professionals and journalists who had come to celebrate the official debut of Thomas Innovation Group's groundbreaking collaboration platform. Jasmine stood near the edge of the terrace, watching the city lights spread out below her like a constellation of possibilities. She wore a flowing midnight blue dress that caught the breeze, her natural curls styled in loose waves that framed her face. 6 months ago, she'd attended a party in this same hotel as a woman running from connection. Tonight, she was here as someone who had learned to run toward it instead. Admiring your handiwork? Brad's voice came from behind her, warm with affection and pride. She turned to find him approaching with 2 champagne flutes, his navy suit perfectly tailored, and his smile more relaxed than she'd ever seen it. The launch had exceeded every projection. The platform was already being adopted by companies across the country, and the campaign Jasmine had created was being studied as a case example of authentic brand storytelling. Our handiwork, she corrected, accepting the champagne. I just helped people understand what you'd already built. You did a lot more than that, Brad said, moving to stand beside her at the terrace railing. You showed me what authentic connection actually looks like. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of challenges and triumphs. After leaving Cole and Martinez, Jasmine had launched her own consulting firm, specializing in authentic brand storytelling for purpose-driven companies. Thomas Innovation Group had been her first client, and their success together had attracted other businesses who wanted to connect with their audiences on a deeper level. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, financial uncertainty, and the inevitable gossip from industry colleagues who whispered about her choices. But there had also been freedom, the freedom to work with clients who inspired her, to build campaigns that mattered, and to wake up every morning excited about the day ahead. Speaking of authentic connection, Brad said, his voice taking on a nervous quality that made her look at him more closely. I have something for you. Brad, you already gave me something tonight, Jasmine protested, gesturing toward the party around them. This launch, this success, this isn't about business, he interrupted gently, reaching into his jacket pocket. This is about us. Jasmine's breath caught as he pulled out a small velvet box, her heart beginning to race as he turned to face her fully. 6 months ago, Brad began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, you taught me that the greatest risk isn't failing at business. It's failing to fight for what really matters. You showed me that authentic connection requires courage, vulnerability, and the willingness to choose love even when it's terrifying. Around them, the party continued, but Jasmine felt like they were alone in their own bubble of possibility. Jasmine Cole, Brad continued, dropping to one knee as the small box opened to reveal a stunning vintage-style ring that caught the light like captured starlight. You are the most brilliant, brave, impossible woman I've ever known. You're my best friend, my creative partner, and the love of my life. Will you marry me?" For a moment, Jasmine couldn't speak. The woman who had built her career on finding the perfect words found herself speechless in the face of such perfect love. Then the tears came, along with laughter and a joy so pure it felt like flying. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, absolutely yes." As Brad slipped the ring onto her finger, the party around them erupted in applause. Jasmine realized that Maya, Tom, Richard, and half the tech industry had been watching their proposal, but instead of feeling exposed, she felt celebrated. "I love you," Brad said as he stood and pulled her into his arms. "I love your brilliant mind and your generous heart, and the way you make me brave enough to be myself." "I love you too," Jasmine replied, her hand splaying against his chest where she could feel his heartbeat. "Thank you for teaching me that some walls are meant to be torn down." Their kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise, and when they broke apart, Jasmine noticed something that made her laugh. "What?" Brad asked, following her gaze. "Look around," she said, gesturing to the party guests. "Half these people are crying and the other half are taking pictures. We're going to be all over social media by morning." "Are you worried about the publicity?" Brad asked, concern flickering in his eyes. "Are you kidding?" Jasmine grinned, looking around at their friends and colleagues, at the platform launch celebration that had become an engagement party, at the city spread out below them, full of infinite possibility. "I spent years hiding from this kind of attention. Now I want the whole world to know that we chose each other." As if summoned by her words, Maya appeared at her elbow, with tears streaming down her cheeks and her phone already out to capture the moment. "I need pictures of this ring immediately," Maya demanded, then pulled Jasmine into a fierce hug. "I'm so happy for you, both of you, even if you did give me premature grey hair with all the drama." "Worth it though, right?" Jasmine asked, holding out her hand to admire the way the ring caught the light. "So worth it," Maya agreed. "But next time you decide to blow up your life for love, maybe give me a little more warning." "Next time?" Brad asked with a laugh. "This is definitely a once-in-a-lifetime kind of love story." "It better be," Jasmine said, rising on her toes to kiss him again, "because I'm never letting you go." As the party swirled around them and the Los Angeles skyline glittered below, Jasmine reflected on the journey that had brought them here. 6 months ago, she'd been a woman who chose safety over possibility, who built walls instead of bridges, who convinced herself that love was a luxury she couldn't afford. Now she was engaged to her best friend and business partner, running a company that aligned with her values, and living a life that felt authentic in every possible way. It hadn't been the safe choice, but it had been the right one. "What are you thinking about?" Brad asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "I'm thinking," Jasmine said, looking around at the celebration of everything they'd built together, "about how grateful I am that you never stopped believing in us, even when I stopped believing in myself." "We're a team," Brad said simply. "In business, in life, in everything. That's what authentic partnership looks like." "Yes," Jasmine agreed, her heart full to overflowing. "It really is." As they stood together on the rooftop where their professional collaboration had begun, now engaged and planning a future that would blend their personal and professional dreams, Jasmine knew that some love stories were worth rewriting all your rules for, some connections were worth fighting for, some risks were worth taking, and some walls were definitely meant to be torn down. 6 years later, at their wedding anniversary dinner, "Do you ever regret it?" Brad asked, reaching across the candlelit table to take Jasmine's hand, "leaving the security of Cole and Martinez to take a chance on us?" Jasmine looked around the small Italian restaurant where they'd had their first official date as an engaged couple, then back at the man who had taught her that love was the greatest adventure of all. "Never," she said firmly. "Best decision I ever made. Even when my investor meetings run long and mess up our dinner plans. Even when your platform updates require me to rebuild entire marketing campaigns. Even when we disagree about whether pineapple belongs on pizza. Even then," Jasmine laughed, bringing his hand to her lips for a gentle kiss. "Especially then. Because in the end, authentic connection wasn't about finding someone who never challenged you. It was about finding someone worth fighting with, worth growing with, worth choosing again and again, every single day." And some love stories, Jasmine had learned, were worth every beautiful, messy, perfectly imperfect moment. The end. A question for you. Looking back on Jasmine and Brad's journey, What moment do you think was the real turning point in their relationship? Was it the first kiss at the party, the vulnerable conversation at the diner, or Jasmine's grand gesture with the resignation letter? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.